Throughout the radio industry, there's many kinds of antennas used for reception and for broadcasting. To help you understand some of the radio technologies covered in this video, I will give a brief overview of antenna theory. To start, take a simple monopole antenna. These are often seen on AM radio broadcast towers. Monopole means one pole. Other kinds of radio antennas may have two poles, such as the dipole antenna. The amount of poles is directly correspondent to the number of conductors used. A monopole antenna has one conductor. A dipole antenna has two conductors. In radio circuitry, the number of poles does not necessarily mean anything about the wave that is being transmitted. A monopole antenna can receive what is transmitted by a dipole antenna and vice versa. The ideal and most efficient monopole antenna is exactly 1/4 the wavelength of the frequency it is transmitting and receiving. On their own, monopole antennas are not particularly efficient and do not have a very useful radiation pattern. In many large applications of the monopole antenna, the energy will be directed towards the sky, which is not ideal because people are on the ground, and people are who you're trying to broadcast to. We can solve this problem by adding a large conductive plane below the monopole antenna. This will be connected to Earth ground. This so-called ground plane helps direct the radiation back towards the Earth's horizon. In AM broadcasting, the wavelength of emitted radiation is quite long. Here are some examples of the scale of wavelengths in relativity to their transmitting antennas. Please note that these are not perfectly to scale, but they do get the idea across. Here are some practical examples of quarter wavelength monopole antennas being used. In AM radio broadcasting, typically you will see something like this. This is called a masked radiator antenna, where the large self-supporting metal structure is the antenna itself. The entire structure is conductive and metallically joined and serves as one pole. Sometimes you will see two towers like these beside each other with a wire strung between. These are not masked radiator antennas. The two supporting metallic masts are grounded and isolated from the radio antenna. Sometimes, as the supporting structure does not have to be conductive, the masts will be made out of timber or other materials. The two towers hold a catenary wire, which in the middle supports a very long vertical wire which is used for one pole of the antenna. The catenary wire, marked here in green, is not part of the antenna radiator. Only the red wire is connected to the transmitter and radiates energy. As freestanding masts are difficult to construct and heavy, sometimes you will see other masts supported by wires. These are called guide masts. The core of the structure, marked here in red, is the antenna, just like a masked radiator. The entire structure is electrically joined and made out of conductive material, whereas the supporting wires, known as guy wires, are isolated from the structure so that the wires do not re-radiate the energy from the radiating antenna. This diamond-shaped guide mast tower is an old design rarely seen nowadays. Typically, towers will look more like this, with a very long straight lattice structure in the middle and several more guy wires to support the structure if one fails. Guide mast towers are not always mast radiators. Sometimes the entire tower is grounded and instead is used as a platform to mount several smaller antennas. This is typically seen with FM and TV applications, where having the antenna mounted on a tall structure is key for having good line of sight and good reception. You may wonder why your pocket-sized AM radio does not need a large, several hundred meter tall antenna in order to receive AM radio waves. Portable AM radios use a kind of antenna called a ferrite loop antenna. They're not particularly efficient, so they're not used for broadcasting applications. However, they're easy and compact to use in a small handheld radio. A ferrite loop antenna consists of a core made from ceramic iron and thin copper wire wrapped around this core to create coils. For the more technically inclined home users of radios, such as amateur radio enthusiasts, a long wire antenna may be preferred. Typically, this consists of one very long conductive copper wire thrown out of a window or roof into a tree, or sometimes attached to a high-flying kite or balloon. Providing a long conductive material, to be better resonant with longer wavelengths as seen in AM radio or shortwave. In the world of VHF and UHF systems, which are primarily used by FM radio and television, the wavelength, and thus the antenna, become small enough that they themselves do not need to be a self-supporting structure. This means that the relatively small antennas can be built with a more advanced design and placed on top of buildings or other mast-like structures with high elevation and good line of sight. The most common kind of antenna used for VHF and UHF is the dipole antenna. It consists of two opposing monopole antennas, which form two poles. The dipole antenna is generally the simplest kind of antenna used for these frequencies, and serves as a base for all other kinds of antenna designs in this frequency range. Because the dipole consists of two opposing quarter-wave antennas, the dipole is 1/2 wavelength long. For VHF and UHF reception, we once again come back to the monopole antenna. These are often found in telescoping, compact form factors, and portable radios, often referred to as whip antennas. Because of their use in portable radios, these kinds of monopole antennas usually do not have a ground plane, and thus can have an unpredictable radiation pattern, causing users to need to adjust their antenna regularly to find a good signal. Coming back to the basic dipole, it is fairly common in old television sets to find what is called a V-dipole, often referred to as rabbit ears. This is a kind of dipole just with adjustable elements that allow you to find a good signal, even indoors, where radio signals can be unpredictable. Sometimes, in more advanced applications, such as two-way radio systems and broadcasting, you'll find what is called a folded dipole. This consists of two normal dipole elements folded back on each other, creating a broadband antenna that can operate on a larger amount of frequencies than the conventional dipole. Commonly, you will see folded dipoles mounted in what is called a collinear array. A collinear array consists of 2 or 4 dipoles positioned half a wavelength apart. Collinear arrays reduce the radiation strength towards the sky and increase the radiation strength towards the horizon. Another advanced antenna, called the Yagi-Uda antenna, consists of a dipole with a reflector and several director elements. Also commonly referred to as the fishbone antenna, the Yagi antenna is highly directional, providing maximum radiation strength towards where it's pointing. Adding more elements increases the gain or directivity of the antenna. The Yagi antenna is commonly used for television reception over long distances. You'll often see them on rooftop aerials on old houses. This chapter relies heavily on information from Jerry Prock, a Canadian radio historian, callsign Victor Echo 3 Foxtrot Alpha Bravo. Finding information on the subjects of naval radio stations was rather difficult, so I'm glad that there was lots of research on his website at jproc.ca. Greater Vancouver has a long history of naval radio and telegraphy. Historically, the most prominent radio station for wireless telegraphy on the west coast of Canada was Point Grey Radio, also known by its callsign Victor Alpha India. In 1908, following the construction of the CPR telegraph system, the Government of Canada commissioned a new wireless telegraphy station to be built on the west coast of Canada. This telegraphy station, located at Point Grey, British Columbia, at the future site of UBC, opened for operation in 1909 with an antenna wire suspended between several trees. Through the years, as traffic through the wireless station increased, there were several upgrades that were made. Notably, the area was clear-cut and the trees were replaced with antenna masts made from timber and stabilized with guy wires. By the 1930s, when this picture was taken, the radio station had expanded significantly, as you can see here. The original Point Grey radio station was located at the site of what is today the Museum of Anthropology in UBC. In the mid to late 1930s, as tensions were rising and leading to World War II, the Point Grey wireless station was rebuilt at a different location and the original transmitter was torn down to make way for the Point Grey battery, which still stands in part of the Museum of Anthropology to this day. In 1940, the new wireless station at the University of British Columbia, located on Westbrook Crescent, opened. The new station was built primarily as a receiving site, with the transmitters located on Lulu Island in Richmond. The transmitters were remotely operated by this station as well as the Merchants Exchange station in downtown Vancouver. The Lulu Island transmitter was continually upgraded through the years and had become quite advanced by the time of its retirement. The new transmitting station at UBC consisted of several timber towers, each of them being a guide mast with an antenna wire on top. During World War II, the receiving station was used primarily for signals intelligence, intercepting Japanese Navy signals. However, after the war, it was used primarily as a Coast Guard station for civilian communications with ships at sea. The station continued to operate normally into the 1960s, primarily operating on shortwave with some frequencies in VHF being used. Come the 1970s, the station was demolished in order to make way for several new developments in UBC, namely the wireless site residences, now called the Walter Gage Residences. After the construction of the Walter Gage Residences, the station continued to operate from inside the Walter Gage Residence building. Due to the introduction of satellite communications for ships at sea, on Monday, June 30th, 1997 at 1 p.m. local time, the station shut down permanently. Alongside the Point Grey radio station, there was another station nearby that was operating. The naval radio stations CKN and CKL became operational on November 29, 1943. There was a receiving site located in Alder Grove, south of what is now the Greater Vancouver Zoo, surrounded by a large forest to be used as an electromagnetic interference buffer. Several kilometers to the east, at the foot of Sumas Mountain, was the transmitting site for NRS Alder Grove. This station was used for transmitting only, and though for a while there was a distinction between NRS Alder Grove and NRS Matsqui, they were eventually joined. The transmitting site consists of several high-frequency, low-frequency, and medium-frequency antennas, including the tallest radio towers in Greater Vancouver, with the tallest structure being a guide mast at 183 meters tall. The site also has lots of unusual-looking HF antennas with various purposes. In 2024, both the receiving and transmitting sites are still active, however they are remotely operated by Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt. Here is a picture I took of the transmitting antennas from an aircraft in 2024. CBC, also known as the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is the primary government-funded radio station and television station in Canada, and they have a long history in Vancouver of interesting radio transmitters. Originally opening in 1925, the station's CBU AM was opened by the Canadian National Railways to provide entertainment and news to passengers. In 1933, the transmitter was sold from the Canadian National Railway to the Canadian Radio Broadcasting Commission, at the time known as CRBC, later to be known as the CBC. The AM transmitter, consisting of 4 guide mast antennas, is located in the marshy intertidal zones off the West Dyke Trail in Richmond, British Columbia. Each of the transmitting antennas is built on a foundation with piles driven deep into the marsh. In order to access the antennas for maintenance, a wooden boardwalk was built out onto the intertidal zone. In 1941, a shortwave relay transmitter call sign CKZU was constructed in order to relay the signal of CBU AM to the interior of BC on shortwave frequencies. Originally, this shortwave station had the call sign CBUX. The shortwave transmitting antenna was co-located at the same facility as CBU AM in Steveston. After a fire destroyed some of the transmitting equipment in 2017, CBU AM reduced its power from 50 kilowatts to 25 kilowatts, and in 2018, 2 of the 4 broadcasting antennas were dismantled, though it would take several more years for the boardwalk to be fully dismantled. Around the same time, the CBC shortwave transmitter on site was shut down permanently after several years of power failures and control issues. The shortwave transmitter was fully dismantled, and there is nothing left of it today aside from a few wooden stubs. This marks the end of shortwave broadcasting in British Columbia.
Julianne, thank you. And thanks for joining us here this Friday afternoon for On the Coast. I'm Lori Franco.
On December 16, 1953, history was made when the station CBUT signed on the air, being the first television station in Western Canada. Upon opening, the CBUT station operated on Channel 2. The transmitter tower consisted of an 80-meter freestanding lattice steel mast, with several directional antennas mounted on top pointing towards downtown Vancouver. The transmitter site was selected because it was almost 820 meters above sea level on Mount Seymour with a great line of sight towards the entirety of Vancouver. The CBUT television station, along with its transmitter, still exist at the same site to this day. This same transmitter site is now also used for CBC's various FM broadcast channels, such as CBC Radio 1 on 88.1 MHz, Radio-Canada on 97.9 MHz, and CBC Music on 105.7 MHz. The CBC towers are also home to the radio station CFRO, Vancouver Co-op Radio on 100.5 MHz. Vancouver's Co-op radio station is a non-profit community-run radio station dedicated to providing engaging conversations on public affairs and broadcasting small, locally made independent music. Co-op Radio was originally founded in 1973 with its first broadcast from Burnaby Mountain in 1975. Co-op Radio's studio resides at Hastings and Corral Street, originally having opened in 1974 before broadcasting in 1975. Before being acquired by Co-op Radio, the studio building had been derelict for 15 years and required extensive cleaning in order to be usable. Co-op's radio broadcasting antenna had remained on Burnaby Mountain until 1982, when it was switched over to broadcasting from the CBC radio tower on Mount Seymour. This is where the station currently resides to this day. Mount Seymour is not only home to the CBC, but it is also home to several other broadcasters and several utility and two-way radio systems. Pictured here is the 120-meter tall Rogers Communication Tower. This tower is a grounded guide lattice steel mast and has several radio stations based on it. The main broadcasters on this tower include Global TV, call sign CHAN, or City TV, call sign CKVU, Jack 96.9, call sign CJAX, or JR Country 93.7, call sign CJJR. Of the towers on Mount Seymour, the Rogers Communication Tower has the highest elevation and is the furthest up the mountain of any of the other towers. Mount Seymour has several other prominent radio broadcast towers used by almost all TV and FM radio channels in Greater Vancouver. Due to Mount Seymour's excellent line of sight to the entirety of the Metro Vancouver region, there are also several repeaters for utility radio services and amateur radio services. Most AM radio broadcasters prefer to broadcast from Richmond due to the large amounts of flat land available, ideal for ground plane monopole antennas. The previous picture you just saw is the former transmitting site of CKPK, at the time known as CJOR. This station, which had an original call sign before CJOR, registered CFXC, originally opened in New Westminster and had it transmitting on top of the New Westminster Trust building. In 1926, the call sign was changed to CJOR. This call sign was held until 1988, when the call sign was changed to CHRX, and was then, in 1994, changed to CKBD, and then again to CKPK-FM when the station moved from AM broadcasting to FM broadcasting in 2008. Though the station's transmitters were typically located atop buildings with fairly rudimentary antennas for the longest time, in 1961 the station upgraded its power output to 10,000 watts and moved into this new transmitter facility on Lulu Island with 3 guide mast radio towers. This 10,000 watt AM transmitter site remained in use from its inception in 1961 until 2008, when the radio station made the switch to FM broadcasting. When the station switched to FM in 2008 with its new transmitter on top of Mount Seymour, the station rebranded to be called The Peak. In 2012, the radio station took on its present-day frequency of 102.7 MHz and rebranded itself as 102.7 The Peak Radio. The station held this branding until July 2022, when the station once again rebranded, this time being called 102.7 Now Radio. 102.7 had an extensive advertising campaign featuring billboards with a thumb which has a talking mouth. This was somewhat disconcerting to some people. Following pressure from fans, on June 7, 2024, exactly 6 days before recording this audio, 102.7 reverted its branding back to 102.7 The Peak. Another notable broadcaster in Richmond is City News 1130, also known by its call sign of CKWX. Technically, the station was founded in 1923 in Nanaimo, BC, with a power output of 10 watts. However, this was a very different radio station from what it is today, and I will not be covering it in this video as it was not in Metro Vancouver. Its current transmitter facility, consisting of 2 master radiator antennas, opened in the 1950s, with a shortwave transmitter being added in 1980. CKFX, operating on 60-80 kHz since the mid-1930s, was officially shut down on June 8, 2007. However, parts of the antenna still remain to this day from what I can observe. The AM station still broadcasts to this day, being an all-news format on 1130 kHz branded as City News 1130. The station is rated for long-range transmission as a Class A station with 50,000 watts ERP. In 1937, students of the University of British Columbia came together to form a radio society. The UBC Radio Society, soon to be known as RADSOC, consisted of a 1-hour weekly show which would be broadcast on the CJOR AM radio station. Throughout the 1940s through to the 1960s, RADSOC began producing programs for CJOR, CKMO, and CBC, also known as CBU. In 1969, the UBC Radio Society first opened its new studios in the brand new Student Union building. The new studios were widely regarded as some of the most technologically advanced and forward studios in the region. On April 1, 1982, CITR started its very first own broadcast with its brand new transmitter. The broadcast took place on 101.9 MHz FM mono only, with 49 watts effective radiated power. In 1985, CITR proposed a plan to the CRTC allowing for the use of their existing frequency with a new directional antenna for the first time in Canada, with a substantially increased power towards Vancouver's downtown. I would like to take a moment to thank the technical manager at CITR for responding to my email with detailed information and plenty of photographs of CITR's transmitting equipment, and for being so enthusiastic about my inquiries. CITR is my local radio station, and I'm a proud listener, and I enjoy the program. Thank you very much, people. Coincidentally, the wireless residences, also known as gauge residences, which I had mentioned earlier in this video in the Point Grey telegraph site, this tower is still in use to this day for radio communications, and the CITR transmitter is located on the roof. The antenna consists of a collinear array of 2 horizontally polarized dipoles with a panel reflector on the back. For reference, CITR uses the 2 antennas on the bottom. The antenna on the top is a Yagi antenna used for the UBC Amateur Radio Club's VE7RHS repeater. CITR's technical manager informed me that they are currently replacing the antennas with newer ones, and they're also replacing the transmitter equipment, because the antiquated transmitter equipment from the 1980s and 1990s is proving to be unreliable in the modern age. To this day, CITR provides programming for marginalized groups and local musicians trying to have their voice heard. CITR also hosts talk shows on political activism and intersectionality. CITR runs a print and online magazine distributed to local record stores called Discorder Magazine, featuring upcoming shows in local underground and independent music, artwork, and all sorts of other information regarding the local music scene. To conclude this video, I'd like to make some statements about how this has helped me further my knowledge of radio systems. Going around and getting to actually explore transmitter sites by foot and getting to talk to the technical manager of a radio station was pretty cool. Actually getting to see some of the practicality of how radio systems are installed and also how they're operated really helps me to further my understanding of radio, and it's helping me go towards getting my ham license later this year. For those who don't know, that means amateur radio. You might ask what got me so interested in radio. Well, ever since I was young, I would listen to CBC radio in my parents' car, listening to things like The Vinyl Cafe from Stuart McLean. Good times. But in more recent years, I was introduced to the concept of radio scanning, and also amateur radio as an entire hobby, and it's really caught on with me. It's just the physics of it, and getting to learn electronics, and getting to learn how to build things. It's really fun, and I do encourage people who find that kind of interesting to look into it. As for me, in October 2023, when I'd come down with COVID, I bought a shortwave radio, also with longwave, AM radio, FM, airband, all sorts of nice things. And it got me hooked on DXing, which basically means trying to receive stations that are really far away. In many ways, the reasons I was brought into radio as a hobby was because of a few online friends of mine who are interested in SkyTrain, as am I, and they scanned SkyTrain's radios. Unfortunately, in mid-2023, SkyTrain's radio system for staff went encrypted on a new commercial system called eCom, which means we can't listen to it anymore. Which is kind of unfortunate, but I'm still very interested in SkyTrain, and still a very nice hobby to have, just SkyTrain in general. I have moved on, and I'm actually the co-founder of OMC0, which is essentially a SkyTrain enthusiast club, with me and a bunch of the other people from the SkyTrain radio scanning hobby. And we all come together to share technical information and archival information, and we just like to keep track of things. For those who are interested, here are a few minutes of radio recordings I've made over the year of being in the radio hobby, and I think they're pretty interesting. You might find them interesting, you might not. If you don't want to listen to them, you don't have to. Thank you for watching, everyone.
Okay, nothing from the BCDN. That's the CWNet on 3652, which starts at 7 p.m. local. Thanks very much, Stuart. A very fine evening to you. You take care. Any further net liaison stations?
Sid called in earlier. He's not here anymore.
Canada, dans universel program of Richmond, 1 hour, 39 minutes. At the tone, 1 hour, 38 minutes. Coordinated Universal Time.
Valid from December 25th at 17310 to December 26th at 01310. Merry Christmas. Inform ATC that you have information Yankee.
Los Angeles International Airport ATIS Information Foxtrot 00530。
但是在中国，我们想呢，还有个医疗安全问题。回到家里以后要头晕怎么办啊？如果那个像我们自己呀，手上割个口子还要出血，还要针肾点血怎么办？